heard this story from an old friend back when we used to kick it. Him and another buddy went out one night cruising. For some reason, they just kept on driving through this North Carolina country road into nowhere. One of them got spooked by not knowing where they were going and recommended a U-turn, but the other one wanted to see where the road led up, so they kept on driving into the darkness of a very wooded countryside location. It wasn't until long that they decided it was enough exploring for the night, so they made another trip back into town. Everything was fine. They got back to the city already and stopped at a gas station not too far from one of their houses. Back then, not everybody had a cell phone, so one of the friends went to a payphone stand and made a call to see what everybody else was doing. Just as he hung up the phone, his buddy in the car yelled out to him to hurry up and get into the car. He looked towards that direction, and to his surprise, he saw a little hairy creature sitting on top of the car looking back at him. The thing was smiling at him with sharp white fangs. He got really scared and wanted to tell his friend because it seemed as if his friend didn't see it. He couldn't even make a sound. It was so hot that all of their windows were rolled down. The thing was sitting on top of the car, swinging its little hairy feet back and forth, in and out of the window, behind the passenger's seat. It kept on staring and smiling at him with that big white fang smile. His friend called out again to hurry up, but he was frozen in fear. He couldn't even move if he wanted to in that very moment. Then, finally, his friend drove the car towards his direction from the gas pump, and the little creature jumped off the car and disappeared. The guy at the payphone jumped into the car and they drove off really fast. His friend asked him, "Dude, what are you doing just staring at me? When I said to come on, let's go, I really mean for us to go." The friend in the passenger seat was terrified. He couldn't answer, but at the same time, he was also thinking to himself, why was he in a rush to get away from that gas station? He didn't see anything. It was only me and I haven't told him anything yet. Or did he perhaps see it too? The two of them drove to one of their houses, and finally, the one driving told him that while he was on the payphone, the driver saw two little hairy creatures sitting on top of the booth that he was using. They were staring at the driver, smiling with those big nasty white fangs, and that was why he was yelling at him to hurry up and get into the car. The two buddies told their parents about the whole situation, and after all the rituals were done, they found out that the reason why those creatures followed them is because they drove out too late that night. They were too far away from civilization, and their windows were opened the whole time. Those little creatures were out looking for food, and as those two were making a turn, the things jumped in behind them in the car and went with them all the way to that one gas station. The good thing is that those things didn't mean any harm. They just wanted to fool around and scare the living. Here's one story my mom told me while she was visiting. My parents live out in the boonies in North Carolina. She and my sister were driving home from my uncle's house. There's this little graveyard by a church that they drive by. Anyways, my mom says that they stopped at a stop sign, and right before they were about to make a left turn, out of nowhere, this wind blows really hard and knocks my mom back against her seat. She didn't think much of it at that time. A few months later, weird things started to happen at home. My sister says that there was a white lady sitting at the foot of her bed, making noises. Sometimes, lights in the house would turn on. Even the TV would turn on and off by itself. I don't remember how my mom did it, but she eventually got rid of this ghost. This also leads on to why my mom no longer sleeps alone. I thought she was just being silly because that's how my mom is, but here is a reason why. It was late at night and she and my dad were listening to a Minnesota radio over the net. they were broadcasting about Zhu Xia, and my mom makes a comment about how he was very bad for taking away all the good and capable people instead of helping the Hmong people. That night, they went to sleep, and my mom hears this male voice talking, but the voice was unclear, so she couldn't make out what it was saying. She asked my dad if he was talking or saying anything, but my dad replied, "No, there's nothing, just go back to sleep." The next night, they're listening to that Minnesota radio again, and when they go to bed, she hears a dog growling at the foot of her bed. She asked my dad again, and he also replied that it was nothing and for her to go back to sleep. On that third night, still listening to that same radio show, my mom is sleeping on the bed. My dad is in the bedroom too, but sitting on the side of the bed. My brother is in the hallway doing his homework. My dad gets up to get something from the kitchen, which was close to the bedroom. Suddenly, my mom said that she felt a black cloth cover her. Because of this, she couldn't move and she couldn't tell who did it, but she hears the dog growling. My mom let out a scream, a blood-curdling scream, and wakes up the entire house. It was then that she discovered that there was no black cloth or no dog. Eventually, she went to a shaman and had him do something, but after that it's never happened ever since. During the whole time she was visiting, my sister slept with her in the bedroom, or she slept on the couch in the living room where we were making a lot of noise. My mom no longer sleeps alone anymore. None of these weird things ever happened while I was living with my parents. I don't really know what's up, but I think it's time for them to move. One of my younger brothers has this female ghost that visits him at night and in his dreams. He fights her in his dreams, and if he wins, he gets sick. I don't know what happened if he would lose, but he tends to sleep with a knife under his pillow because of this. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. Tuckertown is a small town where you see a few houses after a long drive on some back roads. There are a few stores that sell fishing bait and have gasoline for fishermen. There are a lot of old, abandoned houses that look like cabins that have been there for decades. There was a lot of paranormal activity that has been witnessed by Hmong people around this fishing area. For those who live in North Carolina and love to go fishing, they know quite well about this area, or at least have heard stories about it. Here goes the first story of Tuckertown Dam. At the dam, where most people usually fish, bar fences about the height of an average man was built to prevent fishers and children from falling into the water. These fences were built up to your waist. The drop down was about 10 to 15 feet, and the water looks dangerous. The water is especially dangerous when it's released from the upper river through below the dam. When it rushes down, it looks as if the water near the dam is boiling hot. One night, a married couple decided to attempt night fishing. All of the other people who came with them, or fishermen, had left around midnight. The couple kept on fishing by themselves with just one fuel lantern on. At about 2 or 3 in the morning, the husband became tired and decided to go sit down next to the bar fence and had his legs hanging down. A little while later, he was getting sleepy when all of a sudden, he saw a pale purple woman with her hand reaching out towards him between his lap, trying to grab his crotch. He got really scared and jumped right up, trying to prevent the hand from grabbing him. He rubbed his eyes quickly to look at the area where the hand came out from, and there was nothing. The husband was so scared and decided that that was a sign for him and his wife to go home. He told his wife that they should leave because he was tired. He didn't tell her what he had experienced. They quickly packed and left the dam. A few days later, he was curious about the paranormal activity that he witnessed. He asked around if anybody else had similar encounters at the Tuckertown Dam. Some people told him that it was a girl that was murdered and got assaulted at the dam. Her body was found the next day when she was murdered. When I was 12, I had this bad fever. At that time, we lived in these apartments. My brother and I slept on a bunk bed. I slept on top by a window. Anyways, I had this dream that I was being chased by this ghost, and every time I would hop over a fence, it would just repeat itself over and over. After this nightmare ended, I got scared and woke up sweating. As I woke up and laid there, listening to my head pound, I heard a cry of a baby. I was thinking that it was strange. At that time, my cousin was living next door, and they just had a baby girl. However, as I was listening more closely, it sounded like it was coming from outside, and it sounded more like a cat. I decided to roll over and open the curtain. When I did, I was shocked to see a hairy kid squatting down. However, this kid had black vertical eyes, and it looked kind of like a cat and a child mixed together. It had long hair, and it was all dark in color. The thing was staring at me, and I stared back at it. I didn't even know what it was, and it didn't even faze me. Eventually, the thing got up and walked away. Imagine a cat walking upright, more normal like a human, but taking these big steps, going up and down every time it would take a step. Eventually, it got down on all fours and walked like a cat, disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, my mom gave me medicine, and I told her about what happened. She got scared and told me that what I saw yesterday night was a terrifying creature from Hmong folklore called the Banzong. Years later, when I was around 14 years old, I was also experiencing a very bad fever. I had a dream about a kid that told me to go play with him. I didn't want to, but he kept on telling me to go. We started pulling and going back and forth, and he shoved me. Right when he pushed me, I got out of bed right away, standing up, fully awake. I was confused but thirsty, so I walked into the living room to go to the kitchen. When I did, I heard some kids playing outside. I opened the curtains and I saw children playing. I looked at the time on our clock that was hanging on the wall, and it was 3:42 a.m. I was confused, thinking that it was so early in the morning and why would there be children playing outside? After this, I stopped having these experiences. It wasn't until I was 17 years old and went to go visit Minnesota. During this time, I was getting sat on every night by that same kid that pushed me to go play. Every night when that would happen, I would tell my mom, and she'd tell me to go read the Bible. This surprisingly helped, and it stopped. A year later, I moved in with some friends. Here was my experience there. The first night, it was just my friend and I, and he was sleeping on the couch. I was on the sofa, and my pit bull was sleeping on my lap. Everybody else was at work. I was sitting there watching TV. At around 12:30 at night, all of a sudden, I heard footsteps coming from the basement. I thought that perhaps somebody broke into the house, but that couldn't be because we locked every door and window. When all of a sudden, the dogs got up and started to bark. When the footsteps got to the kitchen floor, my dog ran in there. I saw the whole thing, but all I saw was my dog jumping and biting at nothing. Afterwards, the thing or whatever it was disappeared and the dogs calmed down. Here's a fascinating ghost story. I was watching that show, Unsolved Mystery, and this lady and her kid were driving along the freeway. She must have been sleeping under the wheel and ran off the road, crashing the car, killing her instantly, but her child was still alive. He was probably hurt as well, but somehow he survived the crash. The kid was only around 2 or 3 years old. Their car had crashed down the slope of a highway. It was down there for around 3 days without anybody discovering it. Finally, this one couple were traveling at night along that particular spot when they spotted a naked lady lying down in a sleeping position along the side of the highway. The two couples stopped their car immediately as they passed it. They reversed to the spot where they had just seen the naked lady lying down, but there was nothing there at all. Because this occurred at night, they decided to make a report to the police because they were very certain that they saw it and did not just imagine it. In the morning, the police decided to investigate the area, and they finally discovered the car that went off the road. It crashed into some trees down the slope of the highway. When the officers traveled down the slope, they discovered that the mother was dead. But surprisingly and miraculously, the baby was still alive. It was breathing and awake too. Some people speculate that the naked lady lying by the side of the highway was the mother's ghost trying to save her child. I have a cousin who died at the hospital, but while he was still on life support, my mom went and cried to him to say her last goodbye to him that night at the hospital. Later that night at home, at around 1 a.m., while my mother was sleeping, she felt something flapping against her face, waking her up. She got scared, so she woke up and went to wake up my sister-in-law as well to see what the heck it was. They looked around her room and found this tiny furball bat hanging on the closet door. Then, just a little while after that, they received a sudden phone call from the hospital that my cousin had passed away. They decided to keep the bat until morning before setting it free because they believed that that tiny bat was my cousin coming to say goodbye to my mother. My mom called me early in the morning at around 6 a.m. to hurry up and get to my brother's house to see the bat before they let him go. I couldn't believe it and thought that they must have been joking. I got there and they showed me the bat. I was in disbelief because I have never seen a bat like that before. It was very tiny. It almost didn't look real. It looked more like a furball toy, but it was very real because although it was lying very still, the thing was breathing. I can sense that he was very hurt and sad by the way that it was lying very still and just kept on breathing. I then decided that the next step was to let him go, so I took him outside to the front door and sat it down and told him that it was okay and that he could go now. The bat wouldn't fly off. It just laid there as if it wanted to stay. I thought that I should go inside for a minute and come back again. When I finally came back outside, the bat was gone. My brother had lived in that house for 15 years and they have never had any encounters like that until that evening, and ever since they have never encountered another bat ever since. Back in the early 1990s, a Hmong family had just lost their dad due to a bad car accident. A month after the funeral, one of their neighbors, who is a third-shift night security guard for a local junkyard, said that every night when he would go to work at around 11:30 p.m., he will always see a black cat walk up and sit at the Hmong family's doorstep. It would be there until morning when he would come back home from work at around 8:30 a.m. One morning, he decided to tell the Hmong family's mom about the black cat. After she heard about this, one morning she decided to wake up very early to go and see if the cat would be on her front doorstep, and sure enough, there it was. She would watch for hours until the sun would come up, and then the cat would get up and walk away. The feline did this for a while until one of her older sons became a teenager and started coming home very late at night. He said that when his friends dropped him off at the street, he doesn't see anything, but as soon as he reaches the front step of the house, a black cat would appear and growl at him, as if it won't let him inside the house, but he ignored it and walked over and went on inside anyways. Then one day, the boy got very sick and they did a jingle bell on him and found out that the black cat is his dad, and the dad is watching over the family. The dad is mad at him for coming home so late at night and not listening to his mother. Because of this, the dad was going to take him along to the afterlife. The boy got scared, so he stopped hanging out late and promised to look after the family. One night, the dad came to the mom in a dream and told her that he can't watch them forever and that he finally has to go. Ever since then, the black cat stopped showing up at their front doorstep.